Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say hello and welcome everyone to our presentation for the Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target Program. I'm Samantha Meserve. I'm the Director of the Renewable and Alternative Energy Division at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. As many of you know, this webinar will be paired with a series of technical sessions where we will facilitate the collection of stakeholder feedback on the straw proposal. This is in order to quickly translate any stakeholder feedback into red line regulations, allowing us to move forward with the regulatory process and provide needed relief to the solar industry as soon as possible. We are recording this webinar and will plan to post it on our website along with the presentation at the conclusion of the webinar. While the chat is disabled, we have left an opportunity for you all to submit questions. We request that you submit clarifying questions only and reserve any feedback on the straw proposal for the technical sessions happening later this month. We'll utilize these questions to help understand what areas we should clarify during the technical sessions. The team here at DOER has been working on this proposal for a long time, and we're really excited to share it with you. We feel strongly that this proposal strikes a balance between working to meet our ambitious solar targets for both 2030 and 2050, while also acknowledging the burden on ratepayers that programs like this can have. Additionally, we believe this proposal strikes a balance between deploying large amounts of solar infrastructure and prioritizing siting in the built environment in order to protect our most precious natural lands. Lastly, we feel strongly that this proposal prioritizes benefits for low and moderate income ratepayers who have too often been left behind by programs such as this. And with that, I will hand the mic over to my colleague, Carrie Judge. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Carrie Judge, and I'm a program coordinator here on the SMART team at DOER. So this is just a quick overview of the different sections that we'll be going into today. All right, so go to the next slide, please. So I just want to give a quick overview of the stakeholder process to date and stakeholders that we've heard from so far to get to this stage where we're ready to present a straw proposal to you all. So this proposal was developed in large part thanks to the valuable feedback of numerous stakeholders throughout this process. This includes about 200 sets of responses to targeted stakeholder questions that were posed to the public, as well as a series of 9 stakeholder working sessions, which were small group discussions focused on specific topic areas. This straw proposal also incorporates an independent economic analysis that was informed by project cost and financing data that our consultant, Sustainable Energy Advantage, or SEA, received from developers of various project types. And just want to note that this analysis will be distributed and posted on our website for public review following this webinar. And then finally, we consulted with our partner agencies, including the Department of Agricultural Resources, Department of Environmental Protection, and Fish and Wildlife on relevant topic areas, as well as had discussions with energy offices and public utility commissions in other states to learn from their programming and best practices. So we're very excited to share our straw proposal with you all today and hear your reactions to what we've proposed, as well as address any questions or concerns over the coming weeks. So before getting into the content of the proposal, we just want to highlight the guiding principles that we have been keeping at front of mind throughout this process, which are equity, consumer protection, transparency, coordination, and simplicity. And we just ask that you also keep these in mind as we go through the presentation today, as these will be running threads that appear throughout the proposal. And then finally, just a disclaimer before we get into the meat of the proposal, all the program details presented today are subject to change. And as Samantha noted previously, in parallel with this public stakeholder process, we're also actively engaged with our sister agencies who will be key to the development of regulations. And the feedback both from this public process and our engagement with sister agencies will likely impact the final proposal. All right, so with that, we can get started. So we'll be starting with some proposed changes to the overall structure of the SMART program. So starting with the block structure. As many of you know, SMART currently consists of 16 capacity blocks totaling 3,200 megawatts. The compensation rates for each block were set back in 2017, 2018, and decline at fixed rates across capacity blocks. We have received a significant amount of stakeholder feedback about the limitations of the current structure, specifically that this set it and forget it model of compensation rates has left the program unable to respond to real-time market conditions. So recognizing the need for more flexibility within the program to respond to market conditions, we are proposing that the SMART program transition to an annual adjustable block and rate structure. What this means is that base compensation rates and capacity block sizes will be adjusted annually based on a predetermined cost model that's customized for Massachusetts solar economics. Annual rates and capacity may be adjusted up or down depending on market conditions, as well as our progress towards our solar targets. And additionally, incentive rate adders will also be subject to adjustment as part of this annual review. DOER intends to contract with an independent consultant to conduct this cost analysis annually. And this analysis will incorporate project cost and financing data from industry stakeholders and developers to help make sure we're reflecting current costs and ensuring that compensation rates are set appropriately. Okay, so moving on to some specific updates for small projects which are less than or equal to 25 kW. And I just want to note that the majority of small projects in SMART are residential projects serving on-site load, and we may use small and residential interchangeably throughout this presentation. So we're proposing numerous changes to the small residential portion of the program that are intended to simplify the program for residents and installers and ensure that it remains sustainable and beneficial for residents to participate. So regarding the capacity available to small projects, behind the meter projects less than 25 kW will no longer be subject to capacity allocations, and DOER will not limit the amount of annual capacity that can be allocated to small BTM projects. These projects will reserve capacity on a rolling basis and will no longer be required to apply for a preliminary statement of qualification. Instead, they will receive a single statement of qualification in a one-step process at the time that they receive their authorization to interconnect or permission to turn on their system from their utility company. Moving on to some updates for large projects greater than 25 kW and up to 5,000 kW. So as stated previously, block capacity for large projects will be determined annually based on progress towards solar deployment targets and real-time solar costs. However, to create certainty during the initial program transition, DOER is proposing 2 initial annual capacity blocks of 300 megawatts each for the first 2 years of the new version of the program. So that's 300 megawatts in the 2025 program year and 300 megawatts in the 2026 program year. And capacity within these blocks will be allocated across service areas proportional to load. And then in subsequent years, following the 2025 and 2026 program years, DOER will announce the following year's capacity allocation and base compensation rates no later than August 31st. Capacity allocations for large projects will work as follows. So beginning on January 15th of each program year, large projects will have an initial open application period of 10 business days to apply for a capacity allocation. DOER will sequence all applications received in the first 10 business days by interconnection service agreement execution date, and will allocate capacity accordingly pending application review and approval. If there is any remaining capacity at the end of those initial 10 business days, it will be allocated on a rolling basis until the annual capacity is exhausted. If all annual capacity is allocated, any applications that don't receive a capacity allocation will be added to a wait list. And if those projects don't receive a capacity allocation within that program year, they will then be at the top of the queue for a capacity allocation in the following program year. So with this new annual block structure, capacity set-asides for each annual block will be as follows. 30% of capacity will be reserved for projects between 25 kW and less than or equal to 500 kW. 20% of capacity will be reserved for projects serving low-income properties. 20% of capacity will be reserved for community shared solar projects. And the remaining 30+% will not be subject to capacity set-asides. Please note that if one or more capacity set-aside categories are not filled, the department reserves the right to qualify less than the total maximum capacity in that year's block, and the department will not reallocate capacity from one set-aside category to another. All right, moving on to some updates to compensation. So for large projects, again, greater than 25 kW, the formula to calculate incentive payments for large projects remains unchanged. And the formulas for both standalone and behind the meter base compensation rate calculations are shown on the slide for reference. Because the base compensation rates and adders will be adjusted annually based on a levelized cost of energy analysis, the department believes that annual incentive payments will be responsive to and reflective of fluctuations in electricity prices that may impact the value of energy in a given year. And shown on the slide are the estimated large project base compensation rates for 2025. Again, these are based on sustainable energy advantages analysis of the levelized base revenue requirements for various project sizes, and this analysis will be shared after the webinar. Okay, moving on to some updates to small project compensation. So these updates, again, are intended to simplify program participation for residents and ensure that SMART is sufficiently beneficial to residents to ensure their continued participation. So to that end, projects less than or equal to 25 kW will receive a fixed SMART incentive payment over their SMART term. The less than 25 kW SMART incentive payment will be set annually as part of the annual cost analysis, and will be based on the difference between the levelized revenue requirement for small projects and the average residential net metering credit value for the previous calendar year. The residential incentive payment rate will never be set below a floor of 1 cent per kilowatt hour, which is intended to ensure that residential participants always receive some level of compensation for the renewable energy credits or RECs that their systems generate. Additionally, DOER recognizes that low-income customers have historically paid into the SMART program while being underserved as program participants. So to increase the rate of low-income residential participation and in an effort to more equitably distribute the benefits of solar to our low-income residents, low-income projects will receive an adder on the annual fixed residential incentive payment rate, also to be set annually as part of the cost analysis. So estimated less than 25 kW SMART incentive payment rates, again, are based on SEA's analysis of the levelized base revenue requirements for small projects with a 3 cent fixed rate for market rate customers and a 6 cent rate for low-income customers. All right, next we'll cover some updates to project reservation periods and the program transition process. Okay, so starting with reservation periods, recognizing that supply chain issues and other delays continue to impact projects' timelines, the current reservation period extensions that were announced in June of 2023 will remain in effect. And just as a reminder, this means that projects less than or equal to 1 megawatt receive an initial 12-month reservation period. Projects greater than 1 megawatt receive an initial 24-month reservation period. And the fee-based extension will continue to provide a 12-month extended reservation period. Additionally, the department recognizes that projects in interconnection studies and capital investment projects will face additional construction delays. So for projects in interconnection studies that can provide documentation from an electric distribution company or an EDC that the project is included in a study, they will receive an indefinite extension until the completion of the study, and then the standard reservation period will resume. And DOER will coordinate with the EDCs to ensure that we're receiving regular updates on the status of group studies to make sure that projects are moved out of the indefinite extension status and into their standard reservation period as studies conclude. And then for capital investment projects or SIPs, projects that can provide documentation from an EDC or from the Department of Public Utilities that their project is part of an approved SIP at the time of their preliminary statement of qualification will receive a 48-month reservation period. Okay. And just a few notes on the transition process from the current iteration of SMART to the updated version. So projects with an interconnection service agreement or ISA date after the effective date of the modified SMART regulations that have not previously received a SMART statement of qualification or an RPS statement of qualification will be eligible to apply under the updated program structure. Any project with a pending or approved application in the queue will be subject to the predecessor regulations. And DOER will provide regular website and email updates to ensure that stakeholders are kept aware of the filing status for the updated regs and any other key dates. So with that, thank you, and I will pass it off to my colleague, Grace Fletcher, to cover the next sections.
Thanks, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace Fletcher, and I'm a program coordinator on the Renewable and Alternative Energy Division here at DOER. And I will be sharing some additional details on proposed changes to the adders in the program. So on the chart here, you can see the current adder values in the program compared to the expected starting values for all of the adders in the first program year. And you'll notice that several of the locational adders are increasing in order to encourage further development of solar on the built environment, which is a strong priority of this administration. We also have a few new adders being introduced, like the raised racking and community benefits adder, which will be discussed more in later slides. We're also proposing to combine community shared solar and low income community shared solar into one 7-cent adder. And more details will be provided on that in a later slide as well. And as Carrie mentioned, some of these adder values, particularly those tied to material costs, may be adjusted in future annual incentive reviews, but these are the expected values for our first program year. So one of the new adders that we are introducing is a raised racking adder for raised solar systems on top of roofs that maintain a dual use underneath the panels. So the best example is for roofs that have HVAC equipment on top of the building that needs to be accommodated. So the goal of this adder is to maximize roof space potential, particularly in urban areas, and allow for multiple uses of roofs simultaneously. So DOER recognizes the added costs with raising the panels up, and we're therefore treating it as a separate adder from a traditional building mounted system. We're also proposing some changes to the canopy adder. So again, the administration has a strong commitment to maximizing solar on the built environment. So this expansion is meant to take some development pressure off of our undeveloped lands and drive more deployment to previously disturbed lands. So rather than limiting canopy systems to only parking lots and walkways, this expansion is intended to allow for a wider diversity of canopy applications on the built environment that can support dual land uses, noting though that this cannot be applied to projects overlapping with important agricultural farmland. We're also proposing to expand the eligibility for the canopy adder to small systems less than or equal to 25 kilowatts. And this is intended to accommodate residential carports or other similar uses. Next, we have an update to the provision for public entity projects. So to ensure greater project maturity at the time of application and mitigate some of the long reservation periods that we've seen for public entity projects to date, they will now be required to have a contractual right to construct at the preliminary application stage. And noting that the requirement for an executed interconnection agreement will still be waived for these projects. But because of the new block structure, DOER thinks that it won't be as critical to reserve block space as early in the development process because of the rates being set annually and responsive to project needs. So the goal is that projects should be able to apply to the SMART program closer to the time of coming to fruition. So this new requirement will help ensure that projects are slightly further along in the development process before reserving block capacity in the program. Next, we have a few updates to our energy storage adder. So one of DOER's main goals is to ensure that the energy storage systems being compensated through the SMART program are providing as many grid and resiliency benefits as possible. And given the alternative program offerings that are now available that are more tailored to energy storage incentives specifically, DOER will no longer offer an energy storage adder to small residential projects in the SMART program. And for those systems that still wish to co-locate an energy storage system with their solar, they would be encouraged to participate in those alternative programs like Connected Solutions and the Clean Peak Standard. This is also meant to be a cost-saving measure, recognizing again the burden on ratepayers that the program needs to strike a balance with. So we will no longer offer the adder to residential systems as a cost-saving measure. Additionally, we will increase the project threshold size that's required to pair with an energy storage system from 500 kilowatts to 1 megawatt. We also have some operational and functional requirements that we're introducing for energy storage systems. And again, these are intended to ensure that batteries are operating in the most beneficial way possible for the grid and are intended to better align with our Clean Peak Standard program. So for the operational requirements, we're aligning with the seasonal peak periods from the Clean Peak program, which are the most critical times for energy storage systems to be operational. So the new requirement will be for smart energy storage systems to be able to discharge at least 85% of the time during the summer and winter months. Additionally, there's the requirement to reach a minimum of 156 cycles annually in order to continue receiving the energy storage adder. Okay, and with that, we're going to move on to some of our updates to land use and siting eligibility. So once again, the administration has a strong commitment to maximizing solar on the built environment. And throughout our stakeholder engagement process so far, we also heard a lot of really strong support from stakeholders to incentivize solar development on the built environment and take a strategic approach to solar on undeveloped land. We also recognize the need to align the SMART program with the administration's other goals on land protection. Some examples being the executive order on biodiversity conservation, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, and our Resilient Lands Initiative. So here you'll see some of the main updates to the land use eligibility. And one of our main goals with this was to simplify the eligibility criteria to make it more straightforward. So projects will no longer be grouped into land use categories as they currently are, with the goal of making the eligibility more intuitive. So instead of evaluating projects on a parcel by parcel basis, we will be looking at the project footprint itself. So you'll see in the first category, projects that have a footprint overlapping with biomap, core habitat, and critical natural landscapes will not be eligible for the SMART program unless they are sited on an existing building or a previously landscaped or developed area. And because we are looking at the project footprint itself, if there is a parcel that is only partially covered by biomap, a project could still be sited in the area that does not overlap with biomap, as long as there's a minimum 100-foot buffer maintained between the project footprint and the biomap area. The next category will be projects outside of biomap area that will receive a Greenfield subtractor. This will be applied to any ground-mounted system larger than 250 kilowatts if it overlaps with important agricultural farmland or undeveloped land. And we would consider undeveloped land to be anything that does not meet the definition of previously developed in the SMART regulations. Lastly, we have the categories of projects that would not receive a Greenfield subtractor, and that would be any small ground-mounted system less than 250 kilowatts that overlaps with those land types, or if a project qualifies for one of our locational adders. Next, for some updates to the Greenfield subtractor itself. So again, this will be applied to any ground-mounted project larger than 250 kilowatts on farmland or undeveloped land. And currently the Greenfield subtractor only has an acreage-based metric, but DOER is proposing to introduce a flat component as well as an acreage-based component. So all projects will receive a flat subtractor of 6 cents per kilowatt hour, plus an acreage-based subtractor of 0.4 cents per acre that's impacted by the project. And that acreage calculation will include both the footprint of the panels themselves, as well as any land impacted by associated construction activities. And then hand in hand with the Greenfield subtractor, we're also introducing an environmental monitor. So this will apply to any project that is subject to the Greenfield subtractor, as well as all projects qualifying as a dual use system with the agricultural adder. These projects will pay an additional fee at the time of application to the program, and those fees will be used by DOER to retain a third-party environmental monitor. And the main goal will be for the environmental monitor to work with the developer throughout the entire development process to ensure compliance with the performance standards in the SMART regulations and to provide recommendations on best practices and minimizing impacts on the site. So the monitor will visit the site a minimum of 2 times, both pre and post construction, and will be responsible for providing certification to DOER at the preliminary and final application stages that the performance standards have been followed. So the goal with introducing this proactive process is to ensure that any site impact concerns are addressed before they occur. And having a third party involved in the planning and construction processes will help ensure that best management practices are being followed. And just to clarify that the certification that this monitor provides will be in lieu of the professional engineer certification that is currently used for compliance with the performance standards. And for the performance standards themselves, we don't anticipate a lot of updates to the standards, but again, they will apply to any ground-mounted project larger than 250 kilowatts and those qualifying for the agricultural adder. And for the provision on maintaining vegetative cover, applicants will be required to use plantings of native species appropriate to the project area, using the county checklist from the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program as a guideline. Okay, and then another new adder that we're introducing is the community benefits adder. This will be a 6-cent adder that's only available to projects qualifying for the Greenfield subtractor. And this is meant to serve as an optional offset to that flat component of the Greenfield subtractor for developers who engage in proactive community involvement throughout their development process. So DOER will evaluate documentation either before or during the preliminary application stage to show that there has been a proactive community engagement process with both community-based organizations as well as municipal officials. So some examples of documentation that we would accept would be letters or MOUs with different organizations outlining their involvement in the project development process, the activities and input that they've given on the siting, construction, and project benefits. And we would also look for evidence of community outreach and education, such as informational sessions or marketing materials distributed to ensure that the community's input is considered as early in the process as possible. Okay, and moving along, we will now turn to some of our proposed updates for agricultural systems. So again, DOER received extensive feedback from stakeholders on the challenges of developing dual-use solar systems on farmland and the need for some clarifications on eligibility criteria. And this administration also recognizes the important overlaps between agricultural lands and solar and the need to prioritize the protection of farmland while advancing solar development in a responsible way. So we're going to walk through some of our proposed additions and changes to our guideline. First is on our provision for newly created farmland. This revision is meant to help facilitate land access for new or underserved farmers who may pursue an agrivoltaics project as part of a pathway into a new farm operation. So this revision will allow for newly created farmlands to be eligible for the adder if the applicant can demonstrate the pre-existence or viability of agricultural production on the site. And applicants will submit a farm business plan as part of their predetermination process to demonstrate viability. And DOER may also consider other factors like soil analyses, water availability, or site history in determining eligibility of the farmland for the adder. Next, we also received feedback that the existing language about tree clearing for agrivoltaics was vague and overly restrictive. So we've introduced some clarifications on instances of acceptable tree clearing, such as routine maintenance of existing fields, removing isolated trees in an existing field, or other instances of routine agricultural activity. For the panel height requirements, tracking systems are currently required to have a minimum height of 10 feet. We will allow this height to be lowered to 8 feet as long as the project still meets our sunlight reduction requirements, and that if the tracking control system is within the full control of the farmer and is able to accommodate their agricultural activities. So for compliance with this provision, the environmental monitor that is working with the project will verify at their site visits that the farmer has been given control of the tracking system and is trained on its functionality. Next, for the exception process to our sunlight reduction requirements, DOER recognizes the impracticality of using every square foot of land within an array for agricultural production, given the presence of mounting poles and other equipment. So this revision simply clarifies that at least 51% of the area directly beneath the panels should be used for agricultural production in the instance of requesting an exception to the sunlight requirements. We've also introduced some new definitions for previously undefined terms. So for operations that are proposing to transition from crop production to hay or animal grazing, we've introduced what DOER would consider to be a newly proposed operation, and that would be if the site has not been used for grazing or hay production in the previous 5 crop years. We've also specified that the requirements imposed on these operations that are switching to hay or grazing will only be applied if the farmer is proposing to transition more than 10 acres out of crop production. Along the same lines, we also have a definition for what DOER would consider comparable crops. If the new crop that's being proposed is comparable in agricultural practice, equipment requirements, economic value, and environmental impact to the crop that was previously grown on the site. And for our waiver for decreased yield process, DOER recognizes that there are many unexpected conditions in agriculture that are beyond the farmer's control and can significantly impact yields. So these language revisions add some flexibility for those unanticipated circumstances and clarify that DOER is looking for a continuous good faith effort at agricultural production, and that we would take those extenuating circumstances into account in the case of a waiver for decreased yields. And lastly, for agrivoltaics, this slide is a little different than the rest because this is an area of feedback that we are still working through. And based on some input we have heard from stakeholders on photosynthetic active radiation being a more accurate indicator of crop needs than sunlight percentages, DOER is exploring the use of PAR values for project eligibility rather than our current 50% sunlight requirement. But the current shading analysis tool that is used for project evaluation is built to consider sunlight percentages and not PAR values. So we are seeking input on ways that DOER could adjust its current methodology to evaluate for PAR rather than sunlight. And we're also interested in feedback on the concept of a sliding scale adder that would award additional incentive value to projects that design for higher PAR values and what the implementation of this would look like. So we anticipate additional stakeholder conversations on these topics, but wanted to introduce them today as something that's being considered. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Leslie Madalena, to present the remaining sections.
All right, thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Madalena, also a program coordinator working on smart related topics. As a gentle reminder, the following slides that will be discussed are proposals. We are in appreciation of your time as we start to close out the webinar. We're beginning with equity and accessibility. DOER is acutely aware of minimal participation rates in smart low-income programs. During our initial stakeholder process, there was support to pursue further meaningful developments and to align with administration's environmental justice goals. One of the first areas that we are starting off with is community solar. As previously mentioned, the adder for community solar has a notable increase due to the efforts for applicants to include a minimum of 40% of low-income customers to all community shared solar projects. For anyone that may not be aware, this proposal eliminates the prior low-income community share adder and the low-income community share capacity set-asides. 40% is a change, but we are confident that with other state and federal initiatives, we'll be able to provide ways to connect customers for community solar projects. For example, we're in the beginning stage with the Executive Office of House and Livable Communities to establish processes to connect LIHEAP customers to solar. Okay, over time, the department's seen a range of discounts on community shared disclosure forms. In order to ensure a discount is truly provided to end customers, we're proposing to have a minimum of 10% discount for market rate customers. When I say market rate customers, that would be anybody that has a R1 code on their electric bill. Furthermore, a minimum of a 20% discount for R2 and other eligible criteria-based low-income customers. A revised definition slide is upcoming. But to further explain the 20%, it does align with our Solar for All program as a meaningful savings requirement. These two discounts will be in effect throughout the length of the solar agreement. Okay, good to go. We are seeing improvements with our utility providers' billing cycles, and would like that to continue with efforts to process credit transfers within 30 days and provide the department with reports showing any customers that may have balances over 25% of their own annual consumption. This effort with the DOER and the EDCs is acknowledging a need to improve transparency with the community shared experience. We're going to continue our progress into changing and definitions. This one is related to the low income property definition. We're looking to expand this definition to align with the greenhouse gas reduction funds definition of properties that provide affordable housing. By expanding that definition, we're continuing efforts for equity and accessibility to homeless shelters and low to moderate income housing, to name a few. Definitely more on that list. The low income customer definition is being brought in, proposing additional forms of qualification to be allowed besides an electric bill that shows that R2 or R4 rate code. These proposed eligibility criteria will continue to reduce barriers by providing the department with proof from other benefit programs. These programs would align with documentation low-income consumers may have already supplied to the discount rate. Examples include supplemental security income, which is known as SSI, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or Veteran Service Benefits, to name a few again. Lastly, this department is proposing an option to be able to attest to meeting income requirements. With the expansion of definitions under low income, the department is looking to reach projects that can be built on affordable housing structures that are under 25 kW and will serve 100% of its energy output in the form of bill credits or electricity. During the stakeholder process, we did hear about increasing the number of low-income participants under this LISTGU definition. And under this proposal, the 15% may be one customer, or it may be split up to 3 customers. So now that we have wrapped up the equity section, we're moving into the department's efforts under consumer protection. The department is working to strengthen consumer protection guidelines. We have seen other states enforce better business practice, for example, Illinois. And we are making sure customers are aware of the language used in direct ownership, third party, and community solar agreements, and what they should be potentially looking for when making a solar decision. Under these next few slides, we'll highlight some of the areas we've heard a little bit about complaints about and may focus future audit and compliance criteria on. Starting with residential direct ownership, this is when you outright own their solar system. We're faced with companies closing their doors and leaving consumers with many obstacles to overcome on their own. Having a plan of action for maintenance and service in case of bankruptcy would be a benefit. Some consumers are not aware of production guarantees and annual degradation of the solar system over time, and that should be spelled out. Going into residential third-party ownership, third-party ownership are typically described as power purchase agreements or PPAs. We realize that solar agreements may have these points already in place. The department will continue efforts to make sure consumers are aware of the terms of their agreements and will be able to spot check during audit or any compliance checks. Again, going back a little bit into third-party ownership models here, we've seen an array of discount percentage and values stated on disclosure forms. Sometimes it relates to $1 or $2 a year of savings for consumers. So to better ensure an overall savings, we are proposing that low-income customers are offered a minimum of 10% annual savings for a meaningful benefit. Additionally, under the current consumer protection guideline for low-income solar projects, there is a provision that states the escalator in the solar contract must not exceed 3%. The proposal in front of you says that it's a 0% rate escalator, and that ensures that any low-income consumers have a locked-in solar rate throughout the whole length of their contract with no annual increases. Back to community shared solar, also known as CSS. The DOER has field concerns surrounding community solar contracts. It's very important that consumers understand the terms they're agreeing to, including any possible fees or charges. CSS projects have seen some confusion over billing, and a full understanding of the overall process before committing to an agreement is a huge benefit. To make sure CSS is a positive experience for the consumer base, the DOER has plans to assist with informational customer-facing documents that can be attached to a customer disclosure form for visibility. Every customer should be aware of their yearly production and how it relates to their own solar system size and capabilities. Most importantly, a consumer should not feel locked into a community share project without having an opt-out process on an annual basis. We do hope that these changes better support the overall involvement for Massachusetts residents enrolling in community solar. Going into one other slide, the department has mentioned quite a few proposals today that relate to changes for the industry. As we strive for coordination and transparency, we plan on creating supporting guides and informational one-pagers. Our goal is to make the website easier to navigate and find pertinent information. Importantly, continued efforts to support consumers with a best practice guide. We recognize with the proposal for self-attestation, for example, and stricter consumer protection, we are potentially looking for an external vendor to work with the department for audits and compliance purposes. Thank you very much. I will now introduce our Deputy Director.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. We're throwing a lot at you. We are rounding out and going on to next steps. I'm Kobe Frangillo. I'm the Deputy Director of the Renewable and Alternative Energy team here at DOER. All right, so where do we go from here? So DOER has heard the calls to move quickly. We want to balance that with providing ample opportunity for input to shape a strong program. Following this presentation, we'll be releasing an announcement with a link to today's slides, as well as all the information on next steps. Included in that announcement will be a form through which you can ask any questions you have on the straw proposal. All of this information, along with a recording of today's webinar, will also be found on DOER's website. The primary opportunity for feedback on this draft proposal are the in-person technical sessions, which will be hosted on July 22nd and 23rd. And those will feature robust topic by topic conversations, as well as clarifications to any questions that we receive. Feel free to attend any specific topics or all of the topic sessions. If you can't make it to Boston, we'll be hosting a condensed version of the technical sessions virtually on July 29th. Again, those are the primary opportunities for feedback. But in alignment with our equity goals, we do want to offer an opportunity for those still unable to attend the technical sessions. Any concise additional feedback can be submitted by August 2nd. That will begin our revision process as we aim to file draft regulations this fall. As always, you can reach out to us at doer.smart@mass.gov with any outstanding questions or comments. That's it from us. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to continuing these conversations.